Welcome to Hope in the Halls, Christian voices from Washington, D.C., sponsored by Hope to the Hill, also sponsored by Can We Pray, with your hosts Nathan and Amber Kistler. Learn more about Hope to the Hill at www.hopetothehill.com.
Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to the Hope in the Halls podcast.
We're back again. This is a special episode, though.
Yep.
We're going to be answering some questions.
Yeah, so we asked some of you to write in some questions that you had for us, and we were happy to answer them. And so I have them, and I'm just going to read through them. I only picked 10. We had about 20 come in, actually, but I figured I'd save the other half for later on.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to ask these questions, and we're going to go through them like rapid fire almost. And so let's get started. Okay, the first question that we had come in said, how did you guys do ministry during COVID?
That's a good question.
It's a really good question.
Well, it was an interesting time, wasn't it?
It definitely was.
I remember...
We took toilet paper to D.C. when everybody was out, actually, for people, for different members, too.
We have a ministry van that we took around on the way up to Virginia, because if everybody remembers, toilet paper was a scarcity.
I don't know why.
Yeah, it was very strange.
I have never since figured out why toilet paper was such a scarce item.
Not paper towels, toilet paper.
Or like not milk, bread. It's like everybody when the hurricanes come or snow, milk and bread. But no, pandemic was toilet paper.
So
maybe because everybody had like runny noses and stuff.
Maybe
because flu-like symptoms.
And so we took the van. You remember we stopped at every grocery store we could find.
We became Costco members.
We did
during the pandemic for toilet paper.
We stopped at every grocery store we could find on the way from North Carolina to Washington. And it
wasn't for us. We were bringing toilet paper to people up there who did not have any.
Because a lot of people don't realize the staffers, a lot of them don't have vehicles.
Right.
They have to ride public transportation to get to the grocery store and things like that. Well, Uber wasn't running. The metro system wasn't running. So these young people needed to find ways to get their things that they needed. And so we put out an email to all the schedulers and said, hey, we're happy to drop by toilet paper for people. We kind of
became like FEMA for DC in a way. In a weird way.
That's a good way to put that. That was good. We had a lot of fun. Even amidst all of the uncertainty, we had a lot of fun making drop-offs. And we even I picked up some members from the airport whenever they were flying in during COVID, because Uber was not working, at that point. And it was just a very strange time for sure. But we, at that moment, decided, because everything had shut down, once everything shut down, there was no point really in the very, very, very beginning going to DC, because everybody was stuck in their homes. And so we started a prayer call on Tuesday nights, where every Tuesday night we would have anywhere between 10 and 45 members of Congress that would get on the call. And that kind of became our lifeline to the members. And then George and Linda would invite staffers out to their home. They would go pick them up, bring them out to stay for a couple of days. So we did everything we possibly could at that point to try to keep investing in the lives. And as I often say, and Amber knows this very well, we learned the value of quality over quantity in relationships during COVID. So learning a lot more about people than we had ever found out before as far as members, because we're in those 15-minute blocks normally of time in their schedule every single day. Well, if they wanted to spend time with us, we would spend 2 and 3 hours of time with members. We went to Disney with a member and his wife.
We did.
Right after Disney opened up. And so we had some really interesting, experiences with members and staffers through that time. But that's the very nutshell version of that, of how we did ministry at that point.
And what's crazy about that is, at the end of 2020, everything slowly started opening back up. And I'm not talking about just theme parks. They opened up probably quicker than everybody. But the rest of the country slowly started coming back to, I wouldn't say normality, but as close to as they could get it. And they were letting people back in the Capitol buildings. You were going back into the Capitol building slowly. And that kind of leads us into the next question, because the Capitol quickly became off limits again right after this important day in history now. And this next question asks just that. Were any of you in the Capitol during January 6th? And so I can start this because Nathan can tell you, I never am one to keep him home from DC when he goes to work there. That week, particularly, we were sitting at home, and there was a possibility of you going to DC, and you were talking about possibly going up there and meeting with some members, and I had this overwhelming feeling of something telling me, tell him not to go. Tell him not to go. Now, this was before the rioting all happened and all of that. So this wasn't like, after. This was way before. We knew that day was going to be an important day. And so there was obviously a lot of tension that was leading up to that. But I just felt like the Holy Spirit told me, tell him not to go. And so I remember I went to you and I said, babe, I never asked this of you. And I don't ever ask you to stay home because I know the importance of what we do. And I go when I can go, but I never ask you to stay home. And I went to you and I said, please, something I believe the Holy Spirit is telling me that you need to stay home this week. And you did. And so to answer that question, no, we were not in the Capitol building, but I want you to tell your version of what we know happened that day.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of reasons. I think obviously that being the biggest one, but there was very little. You got to take yourself back to that time because people were voting in proxy. Members were. The buildings were still shut down, so there was very little that we could do at that moment. As far as ministerially, I mean, members were meeting us off the Hill at that moment.
And it only got worse.
It did.
After January 6th. I mean, we thought the pandemic was rough.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think after January 6th was way harder to do ministry than during the pandemic. It was like Satan was really, really fighting us when it came to that. They really used that to keep us out of the buildings.
I agree. And so there was a multitude of reasons why we did not go that week. I knew that the members, because I was not at that point allowed to go into the Capitol with them because of COVID. And some of that changed. That's another story for another day. But at that moment, I knew that I can't walk with them to pray with them right now. I would literally just be sitting at the office. And that was another big point or big reason why I just felt like I was not going to be useful in that setting at that moment. What I could do was sit and be texting, and I had a lot of members that were texting in preparation for that day because they knew the insurmountable stress that they were going to be under. And so it was just as easy for me to sit at the house here as it was to sit in the office there and do the same thing.
I remember so vividly, we were sitting in this living room that we're in currently, and we don't watch the news unless there's just, like we always talk about, big events, elections, something catastrophic as what we're talking about right now. We don't ever turn on the news. And I remember hearing that there had been a riot, that they were starting to enter the Capitol building. And I just thought, there's no way. And I remember I went and grabbed the remote. We were both sitting on that couch, and we turned on the TV, and our hearts just sank at the darkness of watching what was unfolding in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think we both had a feeling that something was going to go down that day. And then when
the temperatures were rising, it's like pressure in a teapot.
And when it actually did, all that we could think about were the folks that we minister to and the staffers. And so we started texting and calling members.
Checking on them.
And staffers just to see where they were, to make sure they were okay. Some of the members were locked together in a room And,
some were hiding under their desk in their office.
Yeah. Which the interesting part of that is those none of the folks, the rioters, or whatever you want to call them, made it into any of the office buildings. And so most people don't know how to, it's very confusing. If you've not been in the Capitol, to get from the Capitol underneath, underground to the office buildings is not very easy if you don't know your way. And so most of the members, or all the members that got back to the office,
They were mainly in the
fine.
rotunda and,
Yeah, and in the Capitol and stairwells and things like that. And so we heard from, and I look forward to having the House chaplain on the podcast, because her experience is very interesting, and I don't want to take away from her story.
Yeah, we'll let her tell that story.
Very, very interesting story. But I think that it was an exceptionally difficult day because I felt so helpless with the people that we serve, wanting to be there to be with them, even though if we had been there, we would not have been able to be in the building with them at that point.
Yeah, it was a helpless feeling. I remember I was calling members' wives because I didn't know where they were, and sometimes they're in the office while their husbands go vote. I was calling a few of our staffer friends and their wives, trying to figure out if she had heard from her husband, and just a lot of unknown in that moment of what was going on. And it doesn't. We're not going to get into where you fall on that side of the matter of what you believe happened that day. That's not what this is about. We were in fear for our friends' lives at that moment because we were unsure of even what was going on, really, at that time. And the media will always make it probably 10 times worse than what it is, but it was still really bad. Even in reality, it was just a horrific scene to watch. And now it's obviously I feel like it's just a dark day, in our history on January 6th. That's what people remember, is a riot or whatever you call it in the Capitol building. And it just didn't need to happen. It was, in my opinion, unnecessary. No matter what side you fall on, it was unnecessary. And I wanted our friends to be protected. And I watched some of those videos that they have of them inside of the members, and they're just scared. They're scared for their lives, and it just was sad. It's very sad to watch, and I'm thankful that everybody was okay. Our friends were all okay. But it was a sad day.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter where you stand on that issue, I am of the opinion always that any form of violence, no matter what, and granted, there was a lot of people that just walked into that building. They had never been to the Capitol
nonchalantly.
before. Yeah, I mean, they just kind of walked through through the window, or climbed through a window, or walked through a door, and they weren't trying to hurt anybody.
No,
there was many people who weren't, but there were people who were, and we've had friends and family that were there outside the building trying to get people to stop tearing barricades down. And I think really beyond all of that, the members, or at least the temperature of the feeling that people had towards all members of Congress at that moment was really, really high.
Oh, yeah,
and
for
so
sure.
I think we can all appreciate the fact that there was this incredible high temperature in the country at that point. And that no matter what side of the aisle people were on, that it was an interesting day.
It was.
No doubt. And so.
Well, anyways, next question is, do you ever see Republicans and Democrats talking or getting along? And we've really already talked about that, actually, on a previous episode about a friendship that has happened between a Republican and Democrat ladies who go and they actually pray over the House chamber together. And so that is on a previous episode. But yes, we do. And it's funny, when you walk into the office buildings, you'll see their offices are next door to each other. And they're riding the elevators and they're laughing and sipping coffee and talking. So yeah, I've seen it, and I know that it does happen. And it's not always what you think it is on the news, or sometimes when they're fighting politics, they might be a little bit more animated towards each other. But typically when they kind of walk out of those rooms, it's just a I don't know, it's just a employee to employee almost type mentality, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there definitely is some of that. There's also a lot of the opposite of that too. I think it really depends on who you're talking about. I think in recent months, even probably since January of this last year, during the 15 votes for Speaker of the House.
That was fun.
It was fun. The American people, for the first time, I would dare say, in history, got to watch the process. Or, because even the last time that happened, where there was more than 2 votes for Speaker of the House, had been almost 100 years.
Yeah,
I think maybe something like that. Been pretty close. And so the American people had this beautiful opportunity to see members in action, but also 24-hour cameras running, where members were stuck in the House of Representatives, and they had to talk to each other because there was nowhere to go. And it was a beautiful sight to see members from across the aisle laughing with each other. It was just something that we never get to see as the American people, or at least people outside of D.C. never get to see. And I thought that was really beautiful. So since then, even more of what you've just said, I think, is happening, where people found some camaraderie in ways that they can work. I've also seen, I think, one of the beautiful ways where members can use social media in a positive way. There's a member from North Carolina, Jeff Jackson, that posts videos almost every single day on Instagram, and he's explaining the political process. And he's talked about how he's trying to get to know other members across the aisle. I think that's a really cool, beautiful thing, even though he's, a lot of people may disagree with him.
You should go follow him.
Yeah,
I mean, everybody should go follow him, because it's really amazing to watch his Instagram stories. And
he's not rude.
He's very well spoken.
Yes.
Very kind. We actually met him.
Yeah.
And it's just, I love that his mentality is an open door mentality. It's like, I want to get to know you.
Yep.
Let's just have a talk.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, it does happen. That is definitely something that we see on a weekly basis.
And want more of.
And definitely want more of.
Yeah.
Next question is, how are you funded?
So we are donor funded by generous supporters like you, churches, business folks, and each of our team has their own donors.
And they raise their own support, just like missionaries do, because we consider ourselves missionaries to some of the most powerful people in our country. And so we raise support as so. And if you would like to be a part of that and want to give, you can do so at hopetothehill.com. And I think it's /give, if I'm correct.
That's right.
And then you can pick who you want to give to. All of our team is listed on there. You can also just give to the general fund, as we call it, which is just to the ministry for outreach and things like that. It doesn't necessarily go to specific individuals. It goes towards things like outreach and events that we have, hosting pastors that come into town and things like that. Supplies, office space.
Yeah.
And the next question is this: are there Democrats that you pray with consistently? And I think they're asking this question because we have talked about meeting with Democrats. We've talked about going into the offices of Democrats. They're wanting to know, are there any Democrats that we consistently go into an office and pray with?
Yes. The short answer is yes.
Yeah.
And some for quite a few years now. And we lost one this last election cycle. He retired.
Yeah.
He was probably one of
we
the...
loved him.
Yes. And he doesn't mind us saying his name, but Bobby Rush is his name.
It was wonderful.
And Bobby is a
You should go read
man.
his story.
Yes. A beautiful man. From Black Panther to a pastor.
Yeah.
And so what a precious guy. So yes, the short answer is yes. And I'm very, very leery unless a member of Congress wants us or is okay with us sharing their name. I'm very leery of saying their name. And so
we always have to be cautious
Republican
of that.
or Democrat.
Yeah.
So, but yes, the answer is yes.
Next question is, what do you foresee? Oh, this is a good one. What do you foresee the next few years in Washington being like? And I'm guessing that's because we are coming up on an election year next year. And so we know what 2020 2021 looked like. That was not a lovely year for anybody that was a part of the United States.
No.
But what do we foresee the next few years in Washington being like?
At the rate that we've been going, I think God has really been doing something very special in D.C. And I often tell people we've seen the most meaningful ministry happen in the last 2 years.
Yeah, when we least expected it.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, and we're unapologetically, we're very conservative people. Our ministry is a conservative ministry. We've never, though, let that, and hear me when I say this, we've never let that get in the way of ministry.
Right.
And so I think we've watched some of the most beautiful ministry happen under a president that, conservative people did not want and felt like was, a bad choice. And so I always go back to, and Chaplain Black has said this many times. And I love this.
Many times.
Yeah, the Senate chaplain. He said it when Trump came into office, and he said it again when Biden came into office. It was not King Nebuchadnezzar the will of God for the children of Israel. And when you really think about that question, you have to say, obviously, yes.
Obviously.
And the point of that exercise is, no matter what, we do our part. We vote. We do our part, whatever it is that we do, and we leave the rest to the Lord, to
right.
God, and we could get into a very deep discussion, but His sovereignty, He is sovereign, and He gives us free will, but He is sovereign, and so I look at presidents and people that are in power as people that God has either allowed or placed into that position. And God has done some incredible things over the last 2 years. So the next few years, I see as being some of the most fruitful years of ministry. And that's what I pray for. And God has opened up doors for us to have access into the lives of members in greater ways than we could have ever imagined. So we are excited about what God is doing in the years
And
ahead.
in a time where politics are on the forefront of what feels like everybody's mind, I always have to remind myself that no matter who is president, Jesus is still king.
That's right.
That's the most important thing to remember. We either trust him or we don't. And we know it's going to get worse before it gets better, because that's how he comes back.
The darker the night, the brighter the light.
We say it every episode.
I'm going to have to ask Bill if we can use that song.
He's going to start requesting royalties if you don't stop saying it. Oh, okay. Number 7. What is your favorite moment with a member?
Oh, do you have one first?
My favorite moment with a member. I'm trying to think. Well, I have a few. I loved the moment where we walked into the office, speaking of just a Democrat member, and we found out that he loved The Chosen and that he went to church. I think it was very eye-opening, not just for me, but everybody that was there with us on outreach who walked into that office, totally unexpected to hear those words come out of his mouth, especially because he had been in the news recently for some scandals and other things. And I don't know whether those are true or not. I have no idea. We always know that the news makes it 10 times worse. But just knowing that in the back of my mind, it would be easy to walk into that office and cast judgment. And to hear all that was just, it's something I'll never forget. I'll never forget him leaning back in that chair and watching us at the front of the office and going, "Did you say The Chosen?" And I was like, uh-oh, am I in trouble, or is this a good thing?
Yeah.
And, so I think that was one of my favorite moments. I have so many because I have a soft spot for Barry Loudermilk, and I have a soft spot for Kathy McMorris Rogers, and just meeting them and getting to know them for the first time, and how now that relationship has developed into a deep love for both of them. That's not just a congressman or a congresswoman. I deeply love them as friends and cherish their friendship. And I know that they are prayer warriors. I know that at the end of the day, if I can count on any members of Congress that are going to pray for me, it is those two.
Yeah.
And you can count on it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of a funny, thing, but it turned into a really beautiful encounter with a member that he just retired last year. We talked about him earlier, but I remember every president, or at least inauguration, we've always prayed over the walkway. And if you watch on TV, when the president is, or at least president-elect, is about to walk down, there's a set of stairs he walks down in the Capitol on TV. Well, at the very top of those stairs is these brass railings.
Right.
So we always, every president, we did it for Obama, did it for Trump and Biden. We've always gone to anoint the brass railing and the doorway the president walks under to walk outside. We anoint it with oil and pray that God would bless their presidency, bless this country. And it's just something we've done in quiet. And I remember right before Trump's, because the temperature was already a little high, and people did not like the fact that he was president-elect. So the security was like tripled in the Capitol at that point. They're getting ready for his inauguration. So I called this member one afternoon. I said, hey, would you mind walking with me and some of our other colleagues to go do this? He goes, yeah, when do you want to do it? I said, well, whenever you can. He said, I'll meet you in 20 minutes. I said, okay. So we walked over there, and he walked with us, took us to this specific spot. We anointed it with oil. I said, Congressman, do you want to pray with us? He goes, no, I'll stand right here. And I said, okay. So I didn't think about the fact that that is such a massive thoroughfare for staffers to come in and out of that space. And as we were praying, I could hear people kind of, quietly talking and whispering behind us. And I turned around and looked while one of my colleagues was praying, and that member and his staffer were standing with their arms crossed in front of the doorway, telling staffers as they came by, sorry, somebody's busy right now. You're going to have to come back or go a different way. And I just laughed because I said, I've never had a member of Congress be a bouncer for me before.
I know, right?
It was really funny. And then we ended up, just that member and I ended up, and it was actually the day I met Kathy Rogers for the first time. But that member and I ended up in the Congressional Chapel praying together that day. And it's the only time that I've ever seen a member of Congress literally lay prostrate, flat on their face on the floor, crying, wailing to God for our country, for their colleagues, their friends. I have never seen that since, and I had never seen it before. But this man, and he doesn't mind me saying his name, but Louis Gohmert, this man loves his country. He loves Jesus, and he loved his colleagues. And I'll never forget that moment, because it had a bit of comedy to it, but it turned into one of the most beautiful times of prayer I've ever had in my life. And that's probably my favorite moment with a member.
Next question is, were you guys around or near the baseball shooting? And what they're referring to is the members of Congress, they actually have a baseball game every single year, Republicans versus Democrats. It's a lot of fun. If you've never been, you should go, because it's a lot of fun to go to.
100 years.
It's been going on 100 years. The Republicans won this year.
They won.
And last year.
Thanks to Greg Stubbe.
Yes. Thank you, Greg Stubbe. He's an amazing coach, right? Is he the coach? Or
No,
is that
he is the pitcher
That's actually
and the hitter.
Roger. Is
Roger
Roger their
Williams.
coach? Roger Williams from Texas. But Greg is their pitcher. He's their star pitcher.
And their big hitter.
And he had just came out of a huge injury and still won.
Fell 30 feet off a ladder.
Yeah, so the guy is amazing. He's, every time I see him walking in the halls, he literally is a walking miracle, and he's an amazing man, and we love him. We love Roger too. He's hilarious. You should go watch some of Roger's commercials when he's running for
Just
Congress.
set aside your politics and enjoy the humor.
Just enjoy the humor. But
funny.
he's awesome. But no, we were not at the shooting. In fact, there were no guests there that day. They were actually just practicing.
Yeah, so I was driving into town that morning. I was actually probably about 10 minutes from where the shooting happened when it happened, but we didn't know what was happening there at that moment. We heard that there was a shooting. I got the call from a staffer, from Chris. Amber knows who Chris is. And I went straight to the office buildings, and George and I started walking the halls. And as we were learning what members were there, we went in to pray with staffers, because staffers didn't know if their boss was dead or alive or wounded. And so we spent the whole day literally going from office to office, praying with staffers that God would protect their bosses until they heard something back from them. And then after that, I ended up, that's actually how I met Matt Micah. I ended up at the hospital. I got to go in and pray with some of the folks in the hospital. Matt and I became, and Amber, obviously, Matt and Amber and I have become very, very close friends.
Yeah.
And then we had the opportunity, I have a picture of it somewhere, to anoint Steve Scalise with his head with oil. The first day he came back into Congress, he still had to leave again to go have another surgery. We got to anoint his head with oil and just pray over him. And side note about Steve Scalise, he found out he has cancer today.
Yeah.
And so he's going to be going through that. Steve is a fighter. He is a good man.
He is a good man.
And so so we were not there on the field, though we were very close. And
that whole story is amazing in and of itself. We're not going to go into that, but we are going to have Congressman Loudermilk on. We want him to tell his story because you have to hear it. They call this the Day of 1,000 Miracles.
yeah.
And there's a reason for it. And I'm telling you, it gives me chills every time I say it and I think about all the stories. But you have to hear Congressman Loudermilk's story of what happened and how God intervened that day. Nobody died except for the shooter. In a day where many should have died and didn't. And I totally believe it was because God protected every single one of them. And that's all I'm going to say, because when Congressman Loudermilk gets on here, he is way better at telling the story because he was there. He was on the field. He lived it and breathed it. And he has so much more that goes with it.
And we'll have some other members that were there that day that will come and share. But that day was probably the biggest doorway of ministry that we've had, like as far as a single day. It opened the floodgates of ministry for us with members that I had never met, that I had been trying to meet. But the fact that we were there and we're just there with our staff, just to love on them and to pray with them. I mean, Roger Williams.
When chaos erupts, what happens is people who might not normally be faithful to church, or some people that don't even believe in God, they go to prayer and they look for someone who can pray with them. Yeah. And we are known as those people on the hill. I mean, there are not any other than the chaplains who are there. But they usually call you because you have such a connection with a lot of members. And so because of that, they know, I can call Nathan, I can call Hope to the Hill. They will be here any minute. And so it's amazing what happens when chaos erupts in DC, because that is their first thing to do is to go to prayer. And that's both sides. That's not just a conservative side. That is literal both sides. January 6th, same thing. They go to prayer. They all pray for God to protect them. And I hate how quickly it is that they forget that when things go back to normal. Some don't. Some continue. Some realize the importance of it, and they found that a life with Jesus is better off than a life on their own.
One thing to note about the shooting, congressional baseball shooting, is that all the members on the field that day. Matt Micah was not a professing Christian. He was a staffer or former staffer that was shot in the chest. But all the members that were on the field that day were professing Christians. And the response that each of them had to that entire experience was overwhelming to watch how God used each of them. And so I'm really excited about getting to share some of that story with y'all. And Congressman Loudermilk will be an exceptional storyteller when it comes to that. But
what we really want is for us to get most of them in one room and just do a multiple episode podcast with them all sharing what happened that day from their standpoint, kind of like the movie Vantage Point. They all, the same thing happened, but they all have different stories and versions of how that happened because of how it happened to them. That's really what we want to do. And so be praying for that. Pray that can happen, because it's hard to get all of them in one room. Everybody's schedules are so hectic, and
we're friends with all of them, but it's just hard to get
you just got to get them all settled into one room. But okay, I have 2 questions left. It says, do you live in DC? I often hear you guys say we are at home in Georgia. Well, I can answer that one. Our home is in Carrollton, Georgia, which we love. We shout out to Carrollton, Georgia, the best city in the country. So we actually, when we first got married, we lived in North Carolina, a little city called Vail. And if you've never been to Vail, it's because you've never needed to go to Vail. You would have to need to go there to even see it. But we lived in Vail, North Carolina. It was 30 minutes outside of Hickory. For those of you that know where that's at, that might give you some sort of idea on the map where we were located.
But we were never there.
We were never there.
We had, better way to put it is we had a home in Vail.
We did. We had a home in Vail.
We were either in Washington or Amber was on the road on the weekends.
Yeah, and Vail was kind of the midway point for a while. It was about 5 hours from DC, and it was 5 hours from the bus in Atlanta for me. And so if we did have to both go to work at the same time, it was the same amount of driving, and we felt like that was the best scenario for the time. And then when the pandemic came and life changed a little bit, we started to quickly realize that it would be easier for Nate to fly to DC when he needed to be there. It was actually more inexpensive, or less. How do I say that? More inexpensive? Less inexpensive?
It was less expensive.
Less expensive. That's the term I was looking for. It was less expensive for Nathan to fly to DC than it was to drive because fuel was becoming outrageous. Still is outrageous. And I wanted to be closer to home and, to be able to get on the bus when I needed to be. And so we made the move to Carrollton, Georgia. We weren't sure about it when we first moved here, but let me tell you, we have absolutely grown to be the biggest fans of Carrollton, Georgia. Nathan and I have found a community here that is a great faith-based community. It's a wonderful family community, very faith-driven, just great small businesses. We have a little square, and we love going to the square. There's a bunch of little restaurants and boutiques, and they have little, I don't know what you call them. They have like these downtown days. They call it downtown days is what Carrollton calls it. Yeah. And they have a bunch of vendors that come in and they sell, whether it be like their art or their little signs that they make. And it's a really cool town to live in. And we've grown to love it. But DC is definitely our second home. We are there just as much as we are here. It's half and half during the year.
Yeah. So we have, I fly in with members when they fly into session weeks, and I fly out with members when they fly out. And then when Amber's there, obviously we do the same when she's able to come. And so it actually was an interesting blessing in disguise because I didn't even think about the fact that so many members fly through Atlanta. I mean, members that come from all over the place, the Southeast.
When the rapture happens, we're going to go through Hartsfield Airport. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
We're going to stop there first.
I end up flying with sometimes 10, 15 members on any given day. And so we kind of wait, in the waiting area at the airport to get on the plane together. And it's actually turned into a beautiful opportunity to get to know them outside of DC that I never dreamed would be a thing. And so it's been really, really neat. And so I did, before Amber and I got married, I was in DC pretty much for about 7 years. I had a home in North Carolina, but I was never there.
Yeah. Well, and the Lord worked it out as our team has grown. Yeah. We've added, like Roger. Roger lives 15 minutes down the road from us. And so as Roger starts to go to DC with you, the Lord knew ahead of time, you guys are going to fly together. And so, all these things that we thought was our plan really wasn't.
Yeah.
It was God's plan all along.
That's right. Dr. Roller and Linda, George and Linda have lived in DC for over 20 years now.
They actually live 45 minutes outside of DC.
They live in Manassas, Virginia, and they really, George spends a lot of time focusing on staffers.
Yeah.
And so really, and you need to be there all the time, 24/7, to be able to focus on staffers because staffers are there.
They're there all the time.
So George has had a beautiful, not that George has not been involved with members because he has, but he has become a father to the fatherless. And I mean
and remember, some of these staffers later on become members.
That's exactly right. And George has seen some of that happen. But I've been blown away at how many young men in Washington that are staffers did not grow up with a father.
Yeah.
And George has been able to become a father figure and to love on them. And so it's God really worked it out just beautifully.
He did.
The way it needed to be. And we've been very, very happy with that.
Last question says, is Washington as bad as the news makes it out to be?
Well, it depends on what you watch. So I would say turn off the TV.
I would say don't get all of your information from the news. I mean, I can't tell you how many times we say this on the podcast. We don't watch the news. I think it depends on what is happening too, as well. I don't even think it matters what you watch anymore. I think it's all over exaggerated these days because everybody's selling you something, right? Everybody's selling you something.
Even your favorite social media influencers that are giving you their take on the news, the 2-minute or 30-second, bits of news, they're selling merch that has, think of just this last week, with President or former President Trump's indictment and all of that, people are selling T-shirts with his
mugshot.
his mugshot on them. So everybody, and there's nothing wrong with, people have to make a living. I get that, but everybody's selling something. And so what we've always tried to encourage people to do is to read more, pay attention to things, just really somewhere in the middle of one side and the other is the truth is somewhere in the middle there.
Right.
And so what we've tried to do is just encourage people to remove themselves from all the noise.
Yeah.
And listen in the quiet a bit. And the answer to that question is no, I don't think so. I often hear
unless you're talking about is January 6th really bad? Baseball shooting, really bad. But those are huge circumstances that are not normal occasions.
But it's a blip on the radar.
But if you're talking
history.
about, I think when they say Washington, I think now this is me interpreting what I think the question is asking. I think they're saying as the people, members, is it really as bad as the news makes it out to be? I would say no, absolutely not. So.
Well, and I think even beyond that, to remind people, and I often do, people say this is, at least conservative folks often say, this is the worst it's ever been in American history.
Or they'll say, Washington is such a godforsaken city.
Yeah. And both of those couldn't be further from the truth. One, we've had a civil war in America where, brother against brother, father against son, cousin against cousin. We've experienced, not our generation, but America has experienced the worst bloodshed that a country can have with itself. We're not there. And God willing, we will never be there again.
And we hate when people throw out the term, we're going to, probably going to have a civil war. We don't speak that into existence, and we don't want it. Well, I don't want that to happen.
Our prayer is that God brings revival to this country, that as he brings revival, that we would choose to legislate righteousness because of heart changes that people have had in this country. And only Jesus can bring, and that's not a naive thing to say. It is genuinely what we're called to do, to live out, to pray for. And so our daily prayer is that God does something miraculous in this country. Now, setting that aside, Amber brought up the point, are the people that bad? Nope. You can find, and you will find, that there are more Christians in Congress right now
than there ever have been.
Than we've had at least in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Maybe ever. But, are there as many God-fearing members of Congress as there were in the beginning of this country? No. God-fearing doesn't mean that you have a relationship with Jesus Christ. It just means that you recognize there is a creator. But there are more solid Christians, I believe, in Congress right now. And the people in Washington are kind. People are friendly. And people are always surprised by that. I think we often hear that. I just can't believe how nice people are here. Well, yeah, they're normal people. And they're from all over the country, too. They're not all they weren't born and raised in Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
The staffers are from every corner of this nation. So.
And if you don't like the politics, get out and vote.
Yeah, right.
That's what we tell people all the time. If you don't like it, do something about it. But sitting at home arguing with your TV is not going to change anything about our country.
Or being a keyboard warrior.
Yeah. I'm going to get on Facebook and make a status, and that's going to change the world. It's not.
Well,
it's not going to change
saying?
anything.
I don't remember who said. A lot of people have said it. No one's ever changed anyone's mind on Facebook. So
They haven't. They haven't.
It's never happened.
The best thing you can do is if you are worried about your country, our country, then you get out and vote. In those cities that have struggled maybe with where godly values are important, and maybe they're in certain cities they're not. But if they are to you, you have a voice, and it's meant to be heard, and you have that freedom to do so. It's why our country's so wonderful, and that's why we have the freedom like that. And so, no, it is not as bad as the news media makes it out to be. And when I say it, I mean the people. Even the city of DC is not as bad. There are days, just like any city, whether it's Atlanta or Chicago, where happenings, of just unsurmountable circumstances happen, but it could be a bad day. But no, it is not just a God-forsaken city. It is not. It is a city that we love dearly.
God is still on the move.
Yes, he is.
And, those were good questions.
Yeah,
today.
those great questions. And thank you all for sending those in. And please feel free to send in more as they come to you. We would be glad to answer them. And we can do several episodes where we just sit down and we just answer the questions. We enjoy it. We were glad to answer them.
And if there is let's say there's a particular member maybe you would like to hear from.
Yeah, write in.
We would be happy to chase them down and invite them to be on the podcast and ask them some questions.
And they can also leave a voice note, right? Like a voice recording of how the podcast has encouraged them or maybe changed their minds or uplifted them. And so if it's done that, we would love to hear from you. We've had a few of those come in, and we haven't really talked about it much, but we want to hear those. We want to hear from you guys, and we want to know how this is helping you and how it's informed you, and maybe it's bored you. I don't know, but just let us know either way.
Yeah, please, we'd love to know. But thank you guys so much for hanging with us. This is a little, we're dropping this episode as kind of a surprise just to answer some questions in between the regular scheduled things.
Programming.
There you go. Thank you. The normal, regular scheduled programming that we have. And it's a lot of fun for us to answer those questions. So thank you, Amber. And we're gonna eat dinner now.
Yes, we are.
All right, guys. See you soon.